Well, hello, everyone. This is Phil Carlton. I'm an educator for SVP Worldwide, Viking and FOF. And many of you probably know me. I specialize in our software. You may remember for many years I worked with Don Lusk and we did all the videos for Vantage, and I'm really excited. This is my first live event in quite a while, and it's going out to our YouTube channel and it's going out to Facebook. So I am delighted that y'all have joined me today. I also have Amy on listening, and she'll be monitoring the chat for comments. So if you have questions, please put them in there. If you have a question not related to today's lesson, we probably won't be able to get to that, but I do want to encourage you, if you'll go ahead and put it in the comment section, then they will get back, they will look at those, and they will come back and answer those later on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to digitize this lesson today, but I'm going to do it in a couple of steps. First, I want to talk a little about the foundations or the pieces that are making it up, because we're going to use a couple of different fill types. We're using a multi-wave fill, a curved crosshatch, and then we're really going to concentrate on the Bezier tool. And for those of you who don't know, I have notes. I did a little research. The Bezier tool was invented by Pierre Bezier at Renault in the 60s, so a French engineer, and he did it to create a drawing tool that was a little more precise when they were designing cars. And it really is, if you look at at drawing programs that graphic designers use, it's the tool that you see them use. One of the nice things, if you've worked with our software before and used the standard method, when you're setting curves, you're setting multiple points to drive that curve. With the Bezier tool, you set two curves, and then you have handles that navigate all the curves, and I'll show you kind of how it works. But it lets you get really nice, clean, smooth curves without having to get lots and lots of points. It's really good for precision, and it's creating a vector artwork, which means if I make it larger or smaller, it's going to retain that shape information. That's enough rambling about that. Let me go ahead, and I want to talk through this design just a little bit. So I'm going to open up the design player. One little hint you may not know, if you're in the design player on most computers, if you hold down the control and roll your mouse wheel, you can zoom in a little bit. And what I want to do is just kind of talk through, I'm going to scrub back, and I want to talk through what the different sections of this design are so that when we start using them, you'll kind of know where we're heading. So the first piece of this fleur-de-lis is using a multi-wave tool. And that multi-wave tool is a tool that lets you kind of sculpt the direction of the stitches. And you can adjust how close they are or how wide they are. Then I'm going to come through with the satin stitch. I want you to notice that this satin stitch did not complete across the bottom. I'm going to leave it open here so that we just cover it at the very end with that one large satin oval, and that will give us a cleaner design. Then it's going to come over with a running stitch and get in position for the next one, where it's going to do a curved crosshatch fill. One of my favorite fills. I just think it's really, really classy, and you can get some really gorgeous looks with it. Now, one of the nice things about doing designs like this is I'm designing it a little bit more open. So if you're using it with some kind of fabric, you're going to be able to see the fabric behind the design. So you want to keep that in mind. Then the third flower here is going to be just a mirror of that first one, again with the multi-wave tool. Then it's going to come down here, and this is actually a spiral fill. So it's spiraling starting from about here, and as it gets further into the spiral, it gets heavier. It's going to finish up that satin stitch, then come in at the end with a pattern fill that's pretty open. But again, I want you to notice I'm going to play with the density a little, so it's heavier on the outside and a little more open on the inside. And then comes through and finishes it with a satin stitch and a little triple stitch on top of that. If you've ever done a satin stitch or seen a design with a satin and then a triple stitch on top of it, it's really nice because it gives it kind of a more refined look. So before I move on, Amy, do we have any questions yet?
No questions yet.
I figured that was probably pretty easy, but I wanted to make sure before we went forward. Okay, so now I want to get to my next section. If anyone has any idea where I put my sheet that I was holding up just a minute ago, found it. And before I get to the actual part, I want to go and I'm going to start a new window. So I went over to the File menu. I'm going to go to New Window, which is going to open up a second copy of CREATIVATE embroidery. Now I am working in CREATIVATE today, and I don't think I mentioned It's the new name for our software. It's kind of a whole variety of softwares. In the CREATIVATE family, we have crafting software, quilting software, and today we're working in the embroidery software. For those of you that have been using the MySonet software, it is exactly the same. It's just a renamed version of the software you're used to using. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a blank canvas that just lets it say, okay, I want to start from scratch. Now, those of you who have seen me work before probably know that you can come in here and you can select the machine that you're working on and the hoop that you want to use. You can tell it whether you want it to be natural, up and down, or rotated, horizontal. Most of the time, unless I'm working with a hoop that's going to be splitting the design for me, I find it so much easier to just come about halfway down, put a check mark and enter hoop size, and then I can just type in the height and width. And I'm going to type in millimeters, 150 by 150. And I want you to remember when we're working in millimeters, that's really what you see most of the embroidery designs in. And 25 millimeters equals 1 inch. So if I have 150 millimeters, I'm creating a 6-inch square right now. Now I'm going to jump over to digitizing. To get to digitizing once you're inside the embroidery module, the easiest way to do it is we're going to come to the Create tab across the top. I have an icon here in the insert area called Digitizing. And when I click Digitizing, it's going to open up a window for me in Digitizing. Now, one of the nice things about doing it in the order that I did, I'm going to go ahead and just click Cancel and let it take me right into the Digitizing program. And you'll notice that I have a 150 by 150 hoop. So by going into embroidery first, setting up my hoop, and then jumping into digitizing, I know that my digitizing window is going to be the same size as my embroidery window. Also, I wish y'all could see me because even though I'm not on camera right now and I don't want to be on camera right now, I'm using my hands to talk so much. And so I look like an idiot in a room all by myself. Okay, what I'm going to do in this section is we're going to be using 4 different specialty fills today, and I just want to take a minute to talk through and show you a little bit of how they work. So to bring these in, I'm going to go to the Quick Create tab. And when you're working in Quick Create, Freehand Create, or Point Create, this is all going to be kind of the same process. We have a section here called Fill Area and Line that has a setting for my fill type, a setting for my line, and a setting for whether or not I want applique in my design. If I turn on applique, it will automatically create the placement stitch, the tack down stitch, and finish it like a machine applique. So if I want to do, my first window is going to be a multi-wave fill. I'm going to change this by clicking the bottom half of this button and going down to multi-wave fill. I'm going to leave satin line open. So now I've told the software the next thing that I create, I want it to have a multi-wave fill and a satin line. But one thing to remember, I don't know what my settings may be because I may have done a multi-wave fill a while back and had a really, really open density, and maybe I want it fuller for this. Or maybe I had a 6 millimeter satin line, and this time I want a 3 millimeter satin line. So after I have set my fill and line type, I always come over to the right part of the screen, and if you look over here, under options, I have an option for fill area and line. And when I click that, it's going to open up a window that has settings based on what I told it. So let me see if I can do this right. So that didn't do it. Okay, never mind. So I have lost my mouse. Okay, y'all give me just one moment if you would, please. My mouse has completely disappeared from my screen, Amy, so give me just a second because I'm going to need to, I think I'm going to have to sign off and come back in. I am so very sorry. Give me about 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Do what you need to.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. Thanks for your patience, folks. We'll be right back. Yes, Phil will be working in Windows. He'll be back in just a moment. Thanks, everyone.
And am I back? I'm back.
Yes, all good, Phil.
I am so very sorry. So note to self, I'm not going to zoom in anymore because that did horrible, horrible things. So I'm going to go File, New again. So I go to a new window, go to my blank canvas. I'm going to do my 150 hoop again. Click OK. And then I'm going to go to Create tab and click on Digitizing, and that should take me back over into Digitizing. I'm going to cancel that. Go to Quick Create. I had set up a multi-wave fill and a satin line, and I was saying then I'm going to come over to Options, click on Fill Area and Line, and it shows me the settings for whatever I was doing. So I have a setting for my multi-wave fill and a setting for my satin line. So for my multi-wave fill, I'm going to leave it at the default for a second, which is a density of 20. When we're talking about density, I want you to remember that it is a measurement. Sometimes it's a measurement of millimeters, sometimes it's just a scale, but how it works is it's the measurement between rows of stitches. So if I have a lower density, the stitches are going to be closer together, so the fill is going to be heavier. If I took the density up to 30, for example, this fill would be a little more open. On my line, I'm going to take this to just a 2 millimeter satin line. I think that'll be good for this demonstration. And then I'm just going to bring in a circle. So here is my first circle. It is just a circle filled with a multi-wave fill. But what's cool about the multi-wave fill, if you've never worked on one before, I'm going to go to multi-wave line, point line. And by default, you can see it just creates this little wave of stitches. But if I set points, and I'm just going to set 5 points in kind of an arc, when I right click, that fill is going to follow those lines. And it is a really cool way to build texture into a design. The second one that we're going to do is going to be a curved crosshatch fill. So I'm going to go into the curved crosshatch fill for a second, bring in that circle, make it just a little bit larger. I do want to look at the options here for a second on curved crosshatch fill, just because you see, again, there's a gap, which is kind of like the density. The lower I make it, the closer the lines are going to be together. I can have it in a diamond, which is going to be like squares on point, or I can even change the angle of it if I want to. I can have them square. I could have parallel lines, or I can even create any angles I want for these lines to interact the way I want. And for my stitch type, I can fill it with a running stitch, a double stitch, a triple stitch, or even a motif line, which is going to be one of our decorative stitches. But now what's cool about, I'm going to right click to deselect that. What's nice about the curved crosshatch is if I pull up my properties again, you're going to see there are lines here in the center that adjust the direct or the way these lines curve. These use a lot of math that I'm going to honestly tell you I don't understand. But what I love is if you can see on my screen, there are 4 purple arrows, and those purple arrows will let me adjust how that curve looks and behaves. So I can really sculpt it and get different looks based on how I adjust those. And it's such a nice way to visually create an effect. So there it is at 45. Maybe if I make this a 60-degree angle and make it square, click OK, then you can see now they're going up and down. So that is the multi-wave, or the curved crosshatch fill, and we will use that in the top of the fleur-de-lis. Then the third one that we're going to do is a spiral fill. So I'm going to click on my drop down over here under my fill type and go down to spiral fill. Then I'm going to look at those settings as well. The density right now is 2, which is the smallest that it will go. It will go between, I think, 2 and 40. If I did a fill, well, I'll do a fill of 2 just so you see. If I bring in this circle now, it looks almost like it is just a regular fill, but it is spiraling from the very, very center. So with it selected, I right-clicked. Let me show you how I did that. On the Home tab, if I click Box Select, then I can move an object around. If I right-click one time, it's going to let go of those boxes. So now I have the points that I could adjust. If I right-click a second time, it will bring up the properties for that object. I'm going to change my density to, let's do 15. If I can type, just so you can see what that spiral is doing now. So that spiral is building him for this little origin point. And I can even move that origin point around, and it's going to spiral. It can even spiral from outside my shape and impact the shape here inside. But the other nice thing that we can do with the spiral, if we right click, is I have a gradient option. And what the gradient is going to let me do is adjust the density of the starting point, and I can change it as it moves. So I could have it start at, say, a 5, very, very tight, and go all the way to 40. And you can see the spiral gets larger and larger as it moves away from that origin point. I can also, if I select my right marker and click Add Marker, it's going to add a marker to the left of whatever marker I have selected. And so maybe I'm going to make the middle 40, and the outside, let's take it to 5 again. So it's going to start very heavy, get lighter, and get heavy again. And you can see light, or heavy down to light, and then heavy again. So you can get some really nice sculpting with that. The last one we're going to use may surprise you just a little. It is a pattern fill. So a pattern fill, normally when we think of a pattern fill, it is just a big fill area. I'm going to open up my properties though, and we do have a gradient option in the pattern fill as well. Now I want to show you a couple of things that happen when we're working with open densities and a pattern fill. If I take my density to like 15 right now, which is going to be very open, so there's going to be some space between each row of stitches. If I click Apply, you're going to see that it's here, but there's some underlay on there. I can see some moving stitches. And even if I point this up to 90, there's just a lot of underlay and mess going on. If I turn off the underlay, so I change my underlay to none because I've got an open design, still with this pattern fill, I see some traveling stitches as it tries to get back to that starting point. A little fun trick you want to know is if you go to gradient, so inside my fill window, I'm going to turn on gradient. I can do either a single color gradient where it changes density just like the spiral did, or I could do a multicolor gradient where I go from one color to another. I want to look at the single color gradient because if I go from 15 to 15, even though it feels like it's not changing, when I apply, it gives me a much cleaner fill in the background because the gradient knows you're going to have some open space behind that design and it's not going to fill it with stitches. So just like we did before, I can add a marker here and I can maybe take this density to 3, click Apply. I'm going to open that up just a little so you can see what's happening. I'll click OK this time, and OK will make the change and close the window. So it starts light, gets heavier, and gets light. And so using these different specialty fills is a really neat way to give texture to your design. Okay, now let's jump into the actual design part of what we're going to do, which is, I think there it is, working with the Bezier tool. So I'm going to open up a new window here for a second. And I want to talk for a second in Point Create about what we're used to doing, what you're used to seeing. And I'm going to turn off my pattern fill. I'm going to keep the satin line. I'm on Point Create, and Point Create means I'm going to be digitizing by just setting points to create the design. And if you've done this before, you probably remember that in CREATIVATE digitizing, or what was my sonnet, when we're setting points, if we just set points, we are creating that curve. So I set a bunch of points, I right click, and I've got a line that travels that way. Along that same line, if I set points, I can adjust the curves as I go. If I hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, I start creating corner points. So that's what you're probably used to be doing when you're setting points, when you've digitized before, when you've worked. And it's nice, but one of the things you have to do, if you have a really complex shape, you may have to set a lot of points. And the challenge with setting more points is when you start adjusting it, you have a lot of points to adjust to really create what you're trying to create. I'm going to delete these. I'm going to select the first one in the film strip. I'm going to press the Shift key down on my keyboard and select the last one, and then just press delete on my keyboard, and that just deleted all those things. So now let's look at how the Bezier tool works. So here on Point Create, toward the right side, I have a button here that is Bezier mode. So Bezier, like I said, is a drawing tool that was created by an engineer for creating really specific tight curves that are going to be scalable. Now, the nice thing, or the thing that's different, is with the points we were creating, I was setting points to adjust the curve. With the Bezier tool, if I click, let me click Create Area and Drive. First of all, or Create Area or Line. If I just click and set points, it is setting corner points just like it was doing when I was holding the Shift key with the normal mode. But the magic of the Bezier tool comes when I click and drag. So I'm just going to set 3 points to begin with. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to click and drag. And then I'm going to right-click to finish that line, right-click a second time to see my points. And what's interesting about the Bezier tool is any curve is just defined by the two control handles between the points. So if I look at this one right here, and I grab this control handle, as I grab and pull this or extend it, I've adjusted that line, and I have it sweeping all the way down and back around. And that's all defined with just these two handles. So instead of having to set 10 or 11 or 12 points, I'm going to be able to create a mathematically very, very smooth curve by just adjusting those handles. The other nifty thing I can do, notice that as I'm doing this, I'm adjusting both points of these lines. And this is where the Shift key comes in for the Bezier tool. So if I hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, when I hold Shift, now I'm just adjusting one of those handles. So I'm adjusting the curve coming out of that point. I haven't touched the curve coming into that point. If I click on this handle, which is the one coming into the point, then I can adjust that. So it's really easy, once you get used to this, to create multiple points and get nice, smooth curves with not nearly as many points. Let's see, I think yes, I did actually close something I meant to open, so let me open it up again. So now let me talk a little bit about setting points and creating some shapes. So for this, I'm going to turn on, I'm just going to do a crosshatch fill, a satin line. I'm going to look at my settings. I don't think there's anything I need to worry. I'm going to make the satin line a little bit more narrow by going to a width of 2. And I'm just going to create, first of all, a square and a circle, just so you see a little bit of how that works. So the square, very, very easy. I would just click 4 corner points with the Bezier mode on. And when I right-click, I've got that square. Now I want to zoom in to do the circle because this is where it gets really cool. I'm going to right-click to deselect that zoom tool. I've got a crosshatch fill, a satin line. I've got Bezier turned on. So I'm going to click Create Area or Line. I'm going to click. I'm going to drag to the right, about 2 grids here. So I have a shape here that is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 8 grids tall. So my control handle for this one is about 2 grids to the left and 2 grids to the right of that point I made. And see how that's extending out, and it just fills that shape right there. And so with just 4 smooth points, I'm going to adjust this one just a little bit, make that a little bit smaller. Right-click, and I've defined a circle. Okay, Amy, before I go on, do we have any questions yet?
Yes. Somebody has said that they have accidentally used the Bezier tool and one handle disappeared. How do you get the handle back?
How do you get the handle? I'm going to right-click so that I can see the handles. And I've gone over to the Home tab. And under Points, I have a section here called Convert Points. And these 3 tools at the top of Convert Points will let me change and still keep it as a Bezier. So if I convert points to a corner and click on a point, it becomes a corner. If I go to Convert Points and say I want it to be smooth, it's going to add those handles. I'm going to right click for a second. I'm going to show something here. So smooth will give me the handles back, but not necessarily symmetrical. If I go convert points and I click on my node with the symmetrical tool, it will pop back and it will give me symmetrical handles. So that was on the Home tab under Convert Points. How was that? Any other questions?
Awesome. Actually, just as you were talking about the symmetrical, somebody asked, how do you create a symmetrical one? So you covered
There
that.
you go. So by default, when you do it, it will start out as symmetrical, but by going to the Home tab and going under the point, and what was that? I can't even remember what it was called. Convert Points, you can change it back to a symmetrical. So that took my circle that I destroyed and messed it up.
Perfect.
Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw this cloud. And I'm going to do this a couple of times so you kind of get the feel of the tool. And then I'll show you how it would actually work once you get a little practice. So I've got Bezier tool, I've got create area or line. And first, I'm not going to worry about my handles for a second. I'm just going to, everywhere that I have an X on here, I'm just going to add a handle. Now I'm going to do all the rest of this work by adjusting my little black handles off of each of these nodes. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I do it so that I'm adjusting each one separately. And so I'm just going to kind of, now I know I have some cheat sheets here because I created this as a guide to practice on, but the only tricky part here is the candle coming out of here. I have straight on the line, the handle coming this direction to the right. I have straight on that bottom line so that I get a nice smooth curve there. And then I'm just going to, I'm matching my lines in this point, but I really don't even have to do that. Right click and there's that shape. That was so beautiful and magical. I'm going to delete it and I'm going to do it again. And now I'm going to show you how this tool is really intended to work once you do it. And what I want you to think of is I'm really setting each point in 2 steps. I'm going to set first the curve coming in to the point that I'm setting, and then I'm going to set the curve coming out. So I'm going to click and drag. And notice that black handle on the left side is defining the curve coming into the point I just created. Then I'm going to hold the Shift key down, swing this into place. And now I've defined the curve setting to about this point. So now I'm going to adjust my curve coming in, my curve going out, my curve coming in. In this case, it's really half a circle. So it's just like the circle I created. So I don't have to do anything fancy here. Same thing for this part right here. Same thing for this one right here. I am going to swing that a little bit because this swings out just a little bit further. Now I have to define the curve coming into this one. So I'm going to pull away from that curve, define it, and there we go. It takes some practice to use this tool, but once you kind of get a feel for it, you're going to get much smoother curves much more quickly. So before I go to the design itself, do we have any other questions, Amy?
Yes, just to clarify again, when you are in Bezier mode and you hold the Shift key down,
yes,
what does that do? It does not make a sharp point like it does
so
in
in Bezier mode, the Shift key lets me adjust my handles separately. So by default, when I'm drawing, it wants to say stay symmetrical. If I draw and hold down my Shift key, then I can adjust the second part. So I'll do it several times and I will talk through it as we go. So let's go ahead and I'm going to pop over here. I'm back over in CREATIVATE embroidery. And I'm going to go File, New Window, and actually jump over and walk through the entire process of building this design. So I'm going to go to Blank Canvas. And for this one, I'm going to set a hoop of 120 by 120 and click OK. I'm going to go to the Create tab. Go to Digitizing, and it's going to open up the Digitizing window for me, remembering that I like to do it this way because then my hoop sizes all remain consistent. Now, I do need to get my artwork from Draw and Paint. So I could go to Load or Create a Background and walk through the wizard. There's a place here to create new picture that will open up Draw and Paint for me. I usually don't even go through that much trouble. I'm going to show you a little trick here. If I click Cancel, what we're doing when we create artwork or load artwork from Draw and Paint is we are really just creating something in the background to digitize as artwork. So if I go to my View tab, I have a button here called Edit Background. And if I click Edit Background in the Digitizing module, it will open up Draw and Paint for me. So I can go back over there as many times as I want. And again, very handily, I'm working in a 120 square, just like I was before, because it carried all those settings from embroidery to digitizing over into Draw and Paint. Now, the artwork that we're going to use today is really easy to find. I'm going to go to Insert. And on our Insert tab, we have a design gallery, which is a bunch of sample designs. I'm going to click on that, go to the Ornaments category, and this second ornament right here, Fleur-de-lis 02. I'm going to click Open and click Close. And it has now loaded that piece of artwork. I want it to be about 100 millimeters tall, so about 4 inches tall. So over on the Edit tab to the right, I'm going to click on Transform. In the Transform window, I'm going to make sure Proportional is checked so it stays proportional, and I'm just going to set the height to 100 and click Close. Now I've loaded the artwork from the design gallery, and I brought it up to about 4 inches tall. And the really cool thing about moving from digitizing over into Draw and Paint and back is if I just, well, I changed tabs, but if I just close Draw and Paint, now I'm back in digitizing with that artwork in my background. And I'm going to go ahead and fade it just a little so you can see the points that I set as I go. Okay, do I have any questions before I start?
Yes, somebody is wondering if you could use this technique for digitizing an alphabet.
You could. I mean, so this technique, I mean, if you're digitizing an alphabet, then yeah, you're going to bring them in. The Bezier tool really is just another way to draw points. But if you had an alphabet and you could certainly bring the image in to the background and digitizing and create on top of it. So that would work, yes.
I do have one other question.
Yeah, surely.
Somebody is wondering if the designs that are there in Draw and Paint, well, I'm going to read the question exactly. Sure. Are the designs in Draw and Paint vector files once we create the outlines?
We are working on vectors at that point in Draw and Paint, but it is, in fact, I'll just jump back over to Draw and Paint for a second. So if I go to Edit Background, I'm back to this shape again. So it is vectors, because if I come down here and I tell it, well, I want to edit the point, or wait. There it is. You can see that it's got points. Now, they did not use Beziers to do this, but they did use, it is a vector tool, so this would still scale if I made it larger or smaller. So anytime I'm working on the Draw tab here in Draw and Paint, I'm working in vectors. If I was over on the Paint tab, I would be working with pixels or, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start by doing this first little leaf of this fleur-de-lis. Is it called a leaf? I don't know. Does anyone know? I think maybe it's a leaf. So I grabbed my zoom to rectangle and I clicked and dragged around this first shape. I'm going to go to Point Create. I'm going to turn on Bezier mode because every time I have run this while I was practicing, I would forget to do that. So I'm very proud that I remembered to do that. I'm going to change to a multi-wave fill. And again, I'm going to look at my settings just because it's the first time I'm doing anything. I'm going to leave this to a density of 20. I think that'll work nicely. I want my line to be at about a 3 millimeter. I'm going to make the satin stitch a little bit smaller just because the design isn't huge. I'm also going to uncheck closed border line because remember, I don't want it to close across the bottom. And that's going to give us a little bit of complication in a minute, but we will work through it. Then I'm going to go to Create Area or Line, and I'm going to use the Bezier tool to create the shape. So I'm going to do it the slow way first, or not slow, but kind of the practice way. I'm going to go everywhere where I see that my shape really is changing directions and add a node. And then I'm going to come now with my Shift key, and this is a really good way to practice how this tool works because I can really use the points. So knowing this curve is going to be adjusted by the point coming out of this node and the point going into this node. And I do want to go ahead and line this up so that the design fills here. Otherwise, it would probably give me just a little blurb of the fill inside here. I'm going to right click and there's my shape. I'm going to right click a second time so I can see the nodes that I could then adjust. And just to see the process again, I'm going to delete that one. And this time I'm going to work through it like I would actually do. So if I'm starting at this point, That first thing I'm looking at is the node going away from the direction I'm pulling. So that's going to be how the line's going to come into that point. Hold down the shift key on my keyboard. I'm going to run it to about here. And then I'm going to click and drag until I see that that point has fit. If I need to come back here and adjust this, I just hold down my shift key. Then I'm going to click and drag, hold down my shift key to adjust that one. I'm going to kind of adjust this so it's pointing up toward this curve. I'm going to bring that a little bit sharper, I think. And I think I want to, because this is a longer curve, I'm going to give this a little bit of a longer pull to the right. Hold down my shift key again, lift it up a little bit. Flatten that out so it's going into the shape. And that's that first shape. Now, like I talked, I have just the multi-wave line right now. I want to sculpt it so it travels through here. I'm going to click on multi-wave. Now, this tool is not using Bezier, so I'm just going to set 4 points to kind of curve through there. Right click a second time, and I can adjust those nodes a little until I'm happy with how that's traveling through that shape, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now I do want to talk about one piece before I go to the next thing, and that is this multi-wave fill with a satin line. And you get a little bit of complication when you tell it you don't want a closed border, because notice my start and end points are here. So the fill would start and end here on the lower left-hand corner. It looks like the line starts and end here, but if we think about what's happening, the line's going to go across the bottom and all the way across the top, and it's going to end over here. If I go to the Edit tab and I click Break Apart, it's going to turn this into 2 items. I have my multi-wave fill, and I have my satin line. And notice on my satin line, because I didn't complete that border, it was actually ending here. So it's just good to keep that in mind, because otherwise you're going to think you're connecting from here and it's going to do a little jump stitch. It's just an odd thing that happens when you don't complete the line, the border around a shape. Okay, now I'm going to use a tool we don't use a whole bunch. I'm going to go under File to Preferences for a second, and I'm going to use a tool called Single Stitches in a second. By default, it does not have a maximum stitch length. I'm going to put a check mark and break up, and I'm going to tell it I don't want this tool to create any stitch longer than 3 millimeters. Back on Point Create, here's my single stitch tool, and the single stitch tool has one job. When I click on it, this pink cursor tells me where my last shape ended, and wherever I click, it's just going to add a running stitch straight to that point. It is easier to do this than it is for me to turn off my fill, turn off my line, go into a running stitch. And now I know I've added a running stitch that's moved me into position for this next shape. Any questions about that one, Amy, before I go to the curved crosshatch up at the top?
I don't see any questions about that one.
Okay.
Somebody is just wondering, though, when you got those square points at the bottom of the leaf or petal,
Yes.
How did you create that square in Bezier?
Well, so the nodes, when I'm working with the Bezier, they're just all square. So I think that's the answer. So if I have my Bezier tool, when I click points, the nodes are always going to look like little squares. Unlike if I was doing, let me get rid of that one because that's crazy. If I didn't have the Bezier, you know that when you set, you see circle points until you hold the shift key. With the Bezier tool, the points always look squares, but if they have the little handles coming out, then you know that they're defining a curve. Did that help?
That's all the questions that I see now. I'll keep an eye on that one.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to change this one. For this next shape, we're going to be doing a curved crosshatch. I'm going to change it to curved crosshatch. I'm going to go into my options, my fill area and line. And I think the only thing I'm going to worry about right now is I want to set my gap to 3 millimeters. I like the angle at 60 because it just gave me a little bit of a taller diamond and a nice triple stitch so that I have a prettier stitch inside this fill. And turn my Bezier back on. That was close. And I'm going to do create area line. I am going to go ahead and do a little disclaimer. If you notice at the top, this artwork is not quite symmetrical, even the artwork itself. So I just decided I'm just going to have it do a pretty curve up to the top and a pretty curve down and not worry about trying to do a little bitty dip that's going to be almost invisible down at the bottom. Now, when we're digitizing, The pink cursor tells me the last thing that was set. So I always want to click my next object on that if I want it to sew without any jump stitches. So my curve is heading up this direction. So I'm going to, first of all, think about defining my curve into this shape. So I'm going to click and drag to the left just a little. And that node that went to the right is then defining the stitches that will come back into that shape. I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm just going to kind of point up this shape, come to the side here and just click and drag until I've defined that really pretty curve. For the top, a little experimenting told me that I just could click and get a nice pretty curve up to the top. If you click, by the way, a really good point, if you set points you don't mean to, your inclination may be to click undo. If you click undo, you're going to undo the last object you created. But if you click the delete or press the delete button on your keyboard, it will let you back up one node at a time. So if you click a point that you don't want to, clicking delete on your keyboard will let you back up. And then I can click and drag to mirror that other one on the other side. That looks about right. And then I'm going to pull down to define that, hold my shift key, point it back into the center, right click. That's going to complete the line. Right click a second time to deselect the tool. And then remember on the curve crosshatch, we looked at these handles. So I don't really have anywhere I'm aiming here with these. It kind of looks different every time, but I'm just going to experiment until I'm happy with the way that curves in that shape. And I think that looks pretty nice. And the main thing I'm looking here is, does it look like it's pretty symmetrical inside that shape? And there we go. The same thing that happened before has happened with this one. Because it is a closed shape, I want to go to the Edit tab and break it apart, because then I'm going to see that this next shape actually ends here at that end point rather than over on the left where it looked. I'm going to click on single stitch again, and I'm going to move into position for my next shape. Right click to deselect that tool, very important so that I don't add single stitches everywhere. Now I could digitize this right side here, but it's going to be much easier to just copy this one and flip it and move it into place. I want to show you a little trick, or another trick. On the View tab, we have three different views. We have the 3D view that gives us this pretty 3D view, so we see what the stitches are going to look like when it sews. 2D view that lets us see the actual stitch points. And then we have one that is called Object Views that just shows us the lines and the tools. This view can be very nice when working with shapes and you have a background, especially if you're working with satin lines, because you're going to be able to see the object that is defining that object without dealing with all the mess of the stitches. So I'm going to go to the Home tab. I'm going to select Multi-Wave Fill, the first one on my film strip, hold down the Shift key, click on the satin line, so I have both the fill and the line selected. I'm going to click Copy, and I'm going to click Paste. I'm going to kind of move this out of the way. Ooh, I need to drag this down to the end, so make sure that's at the end. A better way to do that, let me do that better. Let's just get rid of that. I'm going to select this, I'm going to select this. I'm going to click Copy. I'm going to select the last object in my film strip and click Paste. Now I know it's at the end of my design. I'm going to mirror it, and then that is really easy to move into place because I can see my outlines. And you can even use the arrow keys on your keyboard if you need to fine-tune that. This is in a group right now, and I really don't need it to be in a group, so I'm just going to click Group, Ungroup, and right-click, and let's see. So couple of things that we're seeing here. If I have my multi-wave fill selected right now, because I flipped it, remember my start and end were here. So now my start and end are over here on the right side. I'm just going to move them over to the left side. Now I know that this is connected. Now my line shows it starting here and ending here. When you're working with the line, and this is really important, if I move these stitches, it's going to look in my software like I have reversed that line, but I want you to know that when it sews out, it will add a jump stitch. You cannot reverse a line by just moving the start and end points. So if you go to Edit, Reversal, Reverse Line, watch my start and end points. They will automatically switch. And now if you look in my film strip, there are no horizontal lines between any of these shapes. So that tells me that it is sewing right now without any jumps or trims. Okay, before I go to the next one, Amy, just double checking.
Yes, actually, somebody wants to know when you were setting the length of the single stitch, it shows up as a 6. You can go all the way to 6,
Right.
but you said no more than 3 millimeters. Is that always no more than 3 millimeters?
I mean, it's in the preferences, it's going to be whatever you want. I just prefer, even though this is a running stitch, it's going to get uncovered. Once stitches get long, like 6, 7, or 8, they can get snagged. They might get loopy. So just bringing that a little just makes me a little more comfortable. There is nothing wrong with a 6 millimeter stitch if it's going to get covered up by stuff. The other tricky part to those getting, if it was a curved line with the 6 millimeter stitch, it would start looking really bumpy because longer stitches. So the 3 was just kind of an abstract number. I also am not traveling that far, so I wasn't that worried about it, but I just knew, that was just a preference. Okay, so now I need to do the bottom. Were there any other questions? I should make sure.
That was it for now.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. Okay, I want to do this bottom piece, but I need to move into place for this. If I was filling this with just a regular fill, I could just run from this endpoint to this point. I don't want to do that. I can't really use the single stitch because it only does straight lines, so I would have to set a bunch of lines. So I'm going to click the top half of curved crosshatch to turn off my fill. I'm going to change my line type to a running stitch. I am going to check my stitch length. I have a stitch length of 2. You don't want this to be too long because we do have some curves going on here. And then I'm going to click Create Area Line. I am still working with the Bezier tool. I'm actually going to zoom in a little so you can see this a little bit better. Create Area Line. Now really this one right here, I'm going to just click and drag going that direction, click and drag to kind of make that little curve. And then I'm going to just click and drag here and right click a second time. I'm going to go to my view and go back to 3D view so you can see that stitch. And that running stitch just followed that curve. Just really, really similar to what we did when we created that circle. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see this bottom section. I'm going to go back over to Point Create. And this one is going to be using a spiral fill. So I'm going to turn on my spiral fill. I want to go back to my satin line. I'm going to look at my settings for my spiral fill. The density on that spiral fill right now is way too full. At a 2, it'd be just solid. So I'm going to take it to a 10. Click OK. And now I'm ready to digitize this again using this Bezier tool. Now, when you're working on a curve like this that is really, really not very, it's not too sharp a curve, it's a pretty smooth curve, you will find often that you can do this by doing just a corner point here. So I just clicked, I didn't drag, and then I can click and drag. I need to scooch over a little bit, but I can click and drag to define that curve with just that point right there. Then again, to define the curve going into my next direction, I'm going to hold down my Shift key. Let me adjust that curve independently. Then I'm going to do this. Hold down the Shift key, point my curve down toward the bottom. And another smooth curve, all I need to do is click here. I didn't drag here, so I have just a nice single handle to do this curve. Same thing here. I'm just going to mirror that shape on the right side. Once I get it close to where it is, hold down the Shift key. And now I can really cheat on the rest of these because I can see what I had to do. I have to scroll over a little bit. Sorry about that. I can see what that other shape had to do on the right side. So I know exactly where my handles need to go on the left side. And the last one, again, I can do just by clicking a point, right click a second time, and that shape is created. One thing happened here, and I'm kind of happy it did. When we are making a corner that is this sharp, those stitches will eventually get so long that the software cannot create it because it's afraid it might snag. So if this happens, just hold down your Shift key and just adjust that curve ever so slightly, and there it went. So just mess with those a little bit until, and I'm going to adjust it a little so it looks kind of symmetrical. There we go. And once you see that, it's fine. My spiral looks really weird down here, but if I pull it down here, I think it gives me a nice effect. While I have this spiral fill selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to turn on my gradient that we talked about a few minutes ago, just because I think it's a little more interesting if maybe I take this and I'm going to start at maybe, let's do it at maybe a 5. I'm going to grab the second one and add a marker there. And let's see. No, and I'm going to, actually, I don't want that one here. I think I'm going to delete that one. Let's just go from a 5 to a 20. Click OK. And I don't like that at all. I did it backwards. I want it to get darker as it goes down. So I'm going to select my first marker, change it to 20, select my second marker, change it to 5, and click OK. And that is the look that I was going for. Now, again, just so we keep in mind, again, I've done a shape without a closed border. So I want to go Edit, Break Apart. So I know the shape is actually ending over here. And that's going to get me in position to do my last shape. So Amy, I'm going to go ahead and finish this last shape, and then we can cover any questions there. So I'm going to go back to Point Create. I'm going to go to Pattern Fill for this last piece. I'm going to go into my fill area and line. I'm going to leave my pattern at 3. I want to change my angle to 90 so my stitches are running up and down. And I'm going to do a gradient just like we did, just because, again, I think using that single color gradient is going to give me some nice texture. I definitely don't want any underlay stitches visible. I'm going to put a check mark in gradient, do a single color gradient. And for this one, I'm going to go from, I'm going to set my first one to 6. I'm going to set this last marker to 6. I'm going to add a marker that adds it to the left of the one I have selected. I'm going to change this to a 20. And when I click OK, you're going to see in a second it's going to start heavy, open up in the middle, and then get heavy again. On Point Create, I have Bezier. I have everything set up. Create area or line. And if we think about this last oval, it really is just a circle that's elongated. So I'm going to just click to set a corner point here, click to set a corner point here. I'm going to do a curve here, a corner point there, a corner point there, curve here, a corner point here. I right click and it did not finish that line because I made a mistake. So I'm going to right click a second time to deselect the tool. And I could fix it in the settings, but I want to show you a little bit better way to do that. So I'm going to undo that, fill area and line. If I go to my line settings, when I have a fill type, I have an option to say, yes, I want you to close this border. And by default, that is usually checked. So now let me do that exact same thing again. Click to do a corner point, click to do a corner point, do a circle, click, click, curve, click right click a second time. I'm going to zoom to fit. And that design, if we go into the design player or life view, is complete. I'll go ahead and drag that a little so you can really see how it looks. Okay, and that is a little demonstration of how you use the digitizing tools. I'm going to take this one step further and then I'll check about any questions. I'm in digitizing, and just like I left Draw and Paint by closing, if I quit digitizing, it just takes me back into CREATIVATE embroidery, and that design is ready to be saved or exported or sent to one of our machines. Okay, Amy, do we have any questions?
I don't see any more questions other than comments that say, Phil, you're amazing.
Oh, that's so nice. I want to point out one other thing just as a reminder then. Whenever you're done with the design, you would want to do a file, save, and that's going to save the VP4. That VP4 is very important because we didn't save our drawing, we didn't save our digitizing. It's all going to be saved in that VP4. So when I open it back up, if I click Edit Design, over on the film strip, it says this is a design object. So the software knows I did it in digitizing. If I click Edit Design, it's going to take me back over into digitizing where I can make any changes to that design that I want to. And the exact same thing happens with my artwork. If I go to the View tab and I click Edit Background, it's going to take me from digitizing back over into Draw and Paint, where I could make changes to my artwork. So saving that VP4 is really important because that's how you're going to get back to edit the design again. Then you would do a file export to probably a VP3. That's what I recommend for our FOF and Viking machines. It's going to give you a nice, clean, ready to go design. Okay, any other questions or comments, Amy?
I don't see any. Nope, I don't see any other questions.
Well, excellent. Well, y'all, I thank you very much. I will apologize again for my quick restart of the fastest restart of a computer, I think, in the history of ever, but I hope that wasn't too painful. But I really had fun doing this. So I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. This piece of artwork is located, like you saw, in Draw and Paint. So I think you can follow along with this video. And if you do this, I would love to see what you create with it. So Amy, thank you so much for guiding me through my first live and for joining us today. And everyone, I hope you have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you so much.